Well, good afternoon. Welcome to this week's Round the Table. It's that time again, 1 o'clock on a Friday, and this time when we gather around the table, the figurative table online, and get to speak about some important issues that are affecting our nation. And this week we've got some issues relating to Islam. There have been a few stories in the last few weeks about Islam in this nation, and we're excited to be able to talk about these issues, and today we've got some really good experts to speak about them with. We've got Tim Dieppe, our head of public policy. Welcome, Tim.
Afternoon, Paul.
And also Beth Peltola from the One Truth Project joining us.
Hi, how are you?
Doing well, thank you. Do you want to just share with us before we start what the One Truth Project is and what you do there?
Yeah, we basically run courses and develop resources targeting Christians first, and then obviously for Muslim friends around the world. And I suppose the tagline you could say for us is we provide a biblical response to Islam. So what does the Bible say about Islam? We study Islam, we study the Middle Ages, we study our histories, our theology, and our mission. And we do a comparison between the two religions. And that probably sums up what is involved in a lot of our different, or the content of a lot of our resources and so on. We write, we do videos, and we also provide consultation for any Christian who wants to come to us and ask us about Islam.
What's the website, Beth?
OneTruthProject.org.
Great.
You can go on there. There's lots of information there. It's a nice website, so well done with that. And also, you have written a book with Tim recently that's going to come out soon. We're going to talk about that later, but Tim's going to show it now.
Think TV.
There he is. So we'll talk a bit about that as well a bit later. But first, we're going to talk about our first subject, which is this story at Speaker's Corner, where the evangelist Hatun Tash has had some more problems there with police and with her evangelism to Muslims. So first, Beth, you've been at Speaker's Corner quite a lot. So can you tell us a bit about what it's like at Speaker's Corner and what Christians there are trying to do?
Yeah, well, I went there for about 15 years, almost every single Sunday of the year, and met Hatun down there as well, quite a few years ago now. I don't go down there very often at the moment, but I certainly spent a lot of time there sort of through my 20s and 30s. And it's a place where Muslims go. It is actually kind of the hub of Islamic witness to Britain. It's their mission, their hub of mission. And a lot of their Muslim missionaries, including missionaries or Muslim missionaries to Britain, but missionaries that will travel around the world and train Muslims in other places of the world, they'll center in on Speaker's Corner. And so it's just quite interesting to see how it's really important for Islamic mission. And certainly when we started going down, maybe 2000, in the year 2000, at the turn of the century, we went down and we realized that there were so many Muslims there and there wasn't very many Christians engaging with the Muslims, especially in the summer times when you have Muslims coming from all around the world. So it's really their place that they love to do their open air mission, Islamic dawah, Islamic sort of spreading of Islam. And so we would go down to meet them on Sunday afternoons and then get involved in discussions and debates with them.
That's great. And it's great that there is that Christian witness there. And I remember kind of myself about 2006 or something like this, then kind of hearing Jay Smith at my university. He was obviously involved in things at that time here. And so it's all part of this same group. Is that right? Is that fair?
Yes, and you would get to know other Christian groups and so on. So it was a mix of us down there from different churches, different denominations, and we try fellowship with each other. So probably the two girls that I would work with were Pentecostal girls. They were wonderful, and we would just work together down there. And I'm not from a Pentecostal background, but we were so centered on Christ and so centered on our love for Muslims and wanting to share Jesus with them that we would work a lot together.
That's great. I mean, I think so often when Christians get on the front foot and do this kind of thing, then you actually find unity with other Christians who you might not normally bump into. So that's great to hear. Tim, Hatun Tash. There was a story obviously last year with Hatun. Do you want to explain what happened then?
Yeah, so Hatun is really a very well-known character at Speaker's Corner. She turns up every week. She's quite a provocative style, but also a very, very successful style. I think she sees lots of Muslims become Christians, but she challenges the Muslims. She exposes issues around Islam, around their own stories. She exposes that she's taken how many Qurans is it, Beth? 20 or more different Qurans up there.
She has over 30. She's collected over 30 different Arabic Qurans from around the world.
Yeah, 30 different. And of course, the Muslims believe that the Quran was dictated by Allah and that it's perfectly preserved and all this. And when there's 30 different Arabic Qurans, they're all left a bit like, whoa, what's this about? And it shocks them and makes them think and starts to reevaluate their worldview and stuff. And so she's very well known, but obviously the Muslims are pretty upset about how successful she is and how she's able to challenge so well the Islamic message. And so she has been assaulted there a number of times. She's had her books stolen off her Quran stolen off her a few times. And
you just explain about the Quran then. So she's got all of these different copies of the Quran, and then what does she do with them?
So then, there basically has been an ongoing story about the origins of the Quran, and Hatun exposing these different Qurans has caused debate all over the world about the origins of the Quran and how come I thought it was perfectly preserved, all this kind of thing. And a top Muslim apologist was asked about this on a YouTube video and famously said there are holes in the narrative about the origins of the Quran, about the Islamic origins of the Quran. And so in order to illustrate this, Hatun drills holes in her Quran quite provocatively, but there we are. It's Speaker's Corner. It's a provocative place, and says, in order to have a visual aid to say, look, this is, there are real problems in your narrative here, as I've demonstrated before. And so, she does that. And then obviously last year, most famously, she was very nearly killed. I mean, she had someone came and stabbed her from behind. She sort of flinched and actually only got hurt in her arm, but the aim was clearly to get her neck and the jugular veins and all of that kind of thing. And she was hospitalized as a result. And that was obviously quite a dramatic situation. The person who assaulted her has now been arrested. In fact, none of the people who've ever assaulted her have been arrested. Neither has anybody who stole a book from her or a Quran from her have been arrested. And yet she has been arrested a few times. And most recently, is it now 3 weeks ago? She was arrested at Speaker's Corner by some police after having her Quran stolen from her. So her Quran was stolen from her. Then the police arrested her, initially charging her with criminal damage to property. You wonder what happened here. Did the Muslims say, look what she did to our Quran or something? Because it's her Quran. I mean, how they managed to get that charge, or dream up that was something she was arrested for. And you can watch the video footage. She's dragged off, arms behind her back, the Muslims shouting Allahu Akbar and all of that going on. And she ended up being held in a police cell overnight, 15 hours, strip searched, her glasses removed from her, so she couldn't even read a Bible or anything like that, and interrogated at 4 a.m. in the morning. The charge changed a few times. Public Order Act charge now you're arrested on, something else you're arrested on. And eventually they released her without charge in the morning of the following day. And yet, while this is going on, there's a chap there who's got hold of her Quran, who happily displays it in a YouTube video, handling stolen goods. He's not arrested. While she was being arrested, somebody threw something at her head, attempted assault. Some of it did get into her head, and he wasn't arrested. And various people who've assaulted her have not been arrested. And this is a real problem, that the police are arresting the Christian preacher and basically humiliating them in front of the Muslims. And they never dare to, it seems, arrest any of the Muslims for the crimes, actual crimes that they're committing, when Hatun has committed no crime.
And unfortunately, because this isn't just happened with Hatun, it's been happening for years, for decades. But unfortunately, the Muslim there and the Muslim missionaries there know they can get away with even hurting Hatun and taking her possessions, and they would be able to do that to anyone else as well. And so it's just the victims are not getting protected and supported down there. When we were down there, we and I know Hatun would agree with this. You even if you are being provocative, saying what you're wearing or what you are doing, you still are speaking in love, and you still are speaking with a heart that you're concerned for the Muslims. You don't get the same sense when Muslim missionaries are talking to you. You don't get the sense that they care for you at all. It really is trying to take you down by intimidation and by getting the police on your side.
Yeah, they're quite aggressive. They'll shout you down, and if they can't succeed in that, they'll physically sometimes try and take you down.
I've seen a few people in the comments. Thank you for all your comments so far. Referring to David Wood, who they're saying sent her some of the copies of the Quran. You can definitely see an interview on David Wood's channel with Hatun after the incident, which you can go and look there, and also Hatun's channel, DCCI Ministries, on YouTube, where you can find out a little bit more about this.
David's interview is excellent, and I think it can really help to hear it from her mouth. What does she have to say about it? Because some people might be a bit uncomfortable with some of what she does. I wouldn't do some of what she does, but when you hear why she does what she does and her background and what she's trying to do and so on, it can be very helpful.
Yeah.
So Tim,
go on.
No, you go.
Well, and the point is that she doesn't do that on ordinary streets. She doesn't do that when today I know she's off at the mosques, which she does every Friday. She goes and challenges people around the mosque. She's not wearing provocative stuff then. She's not taking a Bible, a Quran with holes in it then. She does it at Speaker's Corner because that's where there is particular protection for free speech, history of free speech, and because that's where the Muslims are very aggressive and need solid, provocative challenging. And let's remember, Jesus was pretty provocative at times, right? Matthew 23, have a read of that and what he said to the Pharisees there. You whitewash tombs, you blind leading the blind, how will you save yourself from going to hell? This kind of stuff. Jesus said it sometimes in the right context. And, so she is contextual, right? Today she'll be outside the mosques and individually talking to people and challenging them about Islam in a much more gentle way. And then on Sunday, she'll be back in Speaker's Corner again, uncowed by various intimidation and assaults and so on, and being provocative again there. And she has seen many people become Christians as a result of what she does. And God uses her in the mix of that.
Absolutely. And if I remember correctly, she had an interview after the stabbing incident where she explained her work outside mosques and how she had initially gone with just a sort of Jesus loves you type message and hadn't got an any engagement with them. But it was when she started kind of actually confronting some of the claims of Islam that
when she starts saying Muhammad is not a prophet, then they start to talk to her, and that is a thing, so she, and then they started to see conversions, right? So she's learnt that actually you just say God loves you, nobody's interested, and you don't end up converting anyone. If you start saying actually Muhammad's not a prophet, then they start having a conversation, and then some people become Christians. And so this is what she's learnt to do.
And she's asking questions. She's asking good questions. And they're questions that Muslims are not usually asked. It's often Muslims asking Christians questions, and Christians tend to be always defending. And what she's doing is she is asking the questions to help Muslims begin to rethink their faith. And that's really important.
Holding Islam to account, that's the thing. And it needs to happen. And we need more people like her.
So if it can't if it can't happen at Speaker's Corner, then where is it going to happen? I mean, how can the police manage these situations better, Tim, do you think?
Well, that's the thing. It's a real problem. They've arrested her a number of times like this and always released her without charge. And we're trying to persuade the police and write legal letters to them saying you shouldn't be doing this. This is not the way you should be treating a Christian preacher who's done nothing wrong, and particularly when there are other people out there who have done specific wrong things. And it seems to be it's not policing without fear or favor. It's policing by capitulation to the mob and basically doing what the mob wants, which is take away the Christian preacher and humiliate them. And so this needs to change, and I hope it will change. We're certainly pushing for it to change and trying to challenge for it to change. And the police should be protecting her, not taking her out and arresting her and humiliating her like this. And they should be arresting the people who've handling her Quran and arresting people who have assaulted her. And this needs to change, and they've got to start doing that.
What's striking on the latest incident, I think, from the video is that it is all very peaceful until the police actually come along to speak to Hatun. It's actually, sometimes you hear that the police are kind of dealing with a messy situation and kind of they're trying to handle a big mob or this kind of thing. But in this case, it seemed particularly clear that they kind of instigated the whole issue.
Yeah.
That has been happening for years. And I mean, even when I was going there over 7 years ago, every week or so, again, the police would always take the Christian and separate the Christian. And often they would I rarely saw the police ever take any of the Muslims, except one time or a couple of times when they actually used physical violence, like with a knife. Then the police might do something. But other than that, it was always the Christian that was basically penalized for the rage of the Muslims. I suppose in a sense they would never separate the Muslims because they knew the Muslims wouldn't get hurt or get attacked. And so they were always taking the Christians out because it was the Christians that were getting attacked. But often I would often witness the Muslim missionaries then begin to lie about what the Christians had done. And it's quite interesting to see how the police so often will listen to that rather than listening to the other side of the story. I mean, to be fair, if they thought there's something wrong had happened, maybe take both people, both the Muslim guy who's taken the Quran and the Christian, and take them aside to deal with it. But that rarely happens.
There's a comment here from Christina Spybe. Sorry if I've said your name wrong. Saying, do you think it is possible the police arrest her to protect her too? Any thoughts on that?
I think sometimes that has happened, but not this time. Like you said, Paul, this was a peaceful situation. And one of the other cases when she was arrested, I think they were worried for her safety and they thought this is the best way of getting her out of here. I still don't think that's the right approach. I think they should actually, protect her and arrest the people who are threatening or who are actually carrying out violence. And that's actually what should be done. But
this time, the way they treated her in the cells was not a protection.
No, I mean, strip searching is not protecting, is it? And removing your glasses so you can't read is not protecting, is it? And interviewing you and interrogating you at 4 a.m, that's got nothing to do with protecting you, has it? Right. So all of that's got nothing to do with it.
Yeah. Well, obviously we're being fairly critical of the police in this situation. And
I mean, David Wood asked her, did they just drive you around the corner and give you a coffee or something? If they're interested in protection, they could have just done that.
Yeah. Yeah. So obviously we're being quite critical of how the police handled this situation, but our next kind of issue to talk about is another situation where the police have come under quite a lot of criticism for how they've handled a very serious situation, which does have a connection with Islam, and that's grooming gangs. This week we had the report published on what happened in Telford. Yeah. Tim, do you want to explain? You've read through some of this report. Do you want to explain?
I've read the executive summary, which is the longest. I think it must be a world-breaking executive summary. 114 A4 pages is the executive summary. And the whole thing is 1,249 pages long. And I've sort of skimmed through and searched through that as well. Gosh, how long is that? I mean, it's crazy. Anyway, the point is that the judge who wrote this inquiry says it's been going on for like 50 years, since the 1970s. That the estimate of 1,000 girls who've been abused is definitely a solid estimate, if not possibly an underestimate, even though people were saying when it came out, that's got to be exaggeration. No, it's not.
Tim, that's in one town. That's just in one town.
I know. That's just in Telford. Just in Telford.
Grooming gang situation in Telford. Yeah.
Yeah, just in Telford. It's all just about Telford. And he says that the police turned a blind eye. For two reasons. One is they were blaming the victims, saying they've made poor choices and it's their fault, even though they're young children, aged between like 11 and 16, who are being raped, multiple times by multiple men, sometimes gang raped, and so on. And the police. And then the other thing is racism. They're afraid of tackling people with a different race. No mention hardly in the whole report of religion, even though that is also a factor. In fact, there are some telling quotes in the report, like a police report where a police person says, the elephant in the room here is that they're all Muslims. And there's just no comment on that in the actual report itself. But it's just quite interesting that there's some recognition of that, whilst at the same time, the report tiptoes around that and tries to avoid talking about religion at all.
It is quite insulting to the ethnicity or anyone who would fit into an Asian bracket, because there are millions of Christian men who are appalled by these abuses. There are Sikh women and Sikh girls who have been abused, and they are Asian. So this idea that it's Asian men is deeply insulting to Asian men who would be appalled by these sex gangs who are 98% Muslim.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
So it's deeply Quranic. It is supported by Quranic history. It is supported by
Explain that for us. Talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, it is part of Islamic teaching. Now, I have dear Muslim friends who were appalled by sex gangs and abuse of girls, even if they're non-Muslims. So sometimes you have to separate your Muslim friend who is as appalled about this abuse as we are to what the actual religion teaches. And that's very important to have that clarification. The religion itself, including the example of Muhammad, according to the earliest Islamic texts, including Islamic law, which is later, but go back right to the core, the text itself of the Quran and the life of Muhammad. So what we say in our book, Tim, borrowed in from what Jay used to teach, the book and the man, looking at the life of Muhammad, looking at the text, you'll see that they both support abuse of especially non-Muslim women. We see that when they went in and took captives of women in warfare. But then that continued because some of those girls ended up being the concubines or the sex slaves of Muhammad and his men. So it wasn't just in warfare that these abuse cases happened. You've got the story of Maryam, the Christian Coptic, who was a teenager, and she was in the maid of Hafsa. And one of the wives of Muhammad went to her house to have his time with her. And then she wasn't there. Hafsa was out. And so he just took the concubine or the woman, the girl, Maryam. And basically that is a sexual abuse. But you have the case of Muhammad divvying up the women to his men. That is sex trafficking of women. But you have that from the very inception of Islam, when it went into North Africa and when the Vikings were coming down and they were enslaving the European girls and the African girls and taking them to the Islamic lands. That, again, was sex trafficking. It's been right through history and it is encouraged in the Quran. There's verse after verse. There's a particular clause you need to look for in the Quran that says what your right hand possesses. That clause is seen in Surah 4, verse 3, Surah 4, verse 24. And then in other books of the Quran, you see it right through the Quran, not just in one or two places, but right through. And in those books, it talks about how you must treat your wives fairly, say Surah 4, 3. But if you can't, just take one. And then if you can't really afford that one, then you can take what your right hand possesses. And that has always meant the woman that you own or the female that you own. So that could be girl or woman, and the female that you own. So then you can do with her what you wish. And that's right through the Quran, that sort of get out clause from being a slightly moral person, then what your right hand possesses, the girl, the female that you own. So it's deeply Islamic. It's in the text, it's in the life of Muhammad, and it's in how Islam spread across North Africa and into Southern Europe in those early stages of Islam. It is a part of the Islamic culture, and unfortunately they can't get away from it, that it's deeply in the life of Muhammad too.
And of course you have Boko Haram, who are taking Christian girls today. You have ISIS, who are doing trafficking and auctioning of girls in their state that they set up. And today you have grooming gangs in the UK that are carrying out this with different levels of understanding of what the text says, I'm sure. But nevertheless, they're encouraged to some degree to view non-Christian, non-Muslim rather, girls as people that they can abuse.
Yeah,
and that's a real problem, and that is not acknowledged in any of these kind of reports and inquiries that keep coming out, and skillfully, carefully avoiding talking about the Islamic aspect of this that's going on.
Almost like Islam is being protected, but actually then huge whole ethnic groups are being insulted. So, for example, one of my close friends is married to a pastor from Burkina Faso, and he is a Fulani. And he is actually from a herdsman, a Fulani herdsman family. The Western media keeps talking about the Fulani herdsmen invading Burkina Faso and other parts of that part of Africa and
Nigeria.
taking Christian girls and killing the villagers. And he's like, no, it's not Fulani. Many of the fighters, the people going in and killing the Christians and the non-Muslims, are actually international Muslims. They've come in from overseas or from another part of Africa. So we're insulting a whole people group because we're so afraid to say what is the actual origin or who the people really are. And it is almost, I would say 99%, it is Islamic. We're not saying every Muslim either. We're not saying Muslims, because that too would be insulting. It is Islamic, and that's what we need to be very clear on.
Yeah. Tim, you spoke to a survivor of this kind of situation, not from Telford, but from somewhere else. Involved with Christian Concern. Do you want to tell us?
There are a number of survivor stories, which make the Islamic connection very clear. And one is a client of ours that we call her Sarah. That's not her real name, but it doesn't matter. We call her Sarah. And, her account is that she was forced into Islamic marriages. I think it was 4 times in the mix of her abuse and, regarded as married by the Muslims in some degree to her abusers. And then, she was kept in a locked room and abused all night and all of this kind of stuff and made a bit of a slave. She basically was a slave, enslaved to these men. And then she had like 8 forced abortions during her period and so on. It was a terrible period that she had of abuse. But the Islamic connection is just made clear there. And then there's another, I was just looking this week, there's a book called Telford Girl. We can see it on Amazon. And this girl in her story says, while I was being raped, the Muslims are praying in the room next door. And she's very clear it was Muslims, and that we should say it's Muslims, and not that every Muslim is like this, but it's an Islamic thing. And that's in Telford, of course. And there are many other testimonies of girls saying they were given Islamic names or quoted the Quran to them, or this kind of thing was going on. And nobody ever talks about that, but it is, the Islamic nature of it is front and center really quite often when it comes to these girls and what actually happened to them.
And so it's not just a kind of nominal Islam where someone's kind of grew up in a Muslim family and has departed from it, but it's a
textual Islam. It's based on the actual foundations of Islam. Of course, complete opposite of Christ, isn't it? Where the outworking, we could legitimately say if a Christian did something like that, as some have in certain portions of the church, we could as Christians textually oppose it. According to the life of Jesus and the Bible. You can't do that with Islam, and that's the great difficulty.
Great point, Beth. And the other thing to note is the scale of this. Right, in 2019, it came out there'd been 19,000 victims of sexual abuse across the country. Well, if we just extrapolate that in a very simple way and say roughly 20,000 over 40 years, that's 800,000 victims. Right, that's a lot. That's a huge number. If it's anything like correct, and Sarah Champion, who's the MP for Rotherham, has said it could be 1 million victims, right? Even if that's not correct, each one of these victims has been raped dozens of times, right? So let's say it's only 100,000 victims. You're still talking about millions of rapes. So there's millions and millions of rapes that have happened through these grooming gangs up and down the country over 40 or 50 years. And still, we're afraid to talk about what it's really about and what's really happening about it. We're basically sacrificing these girls on the altar of political correctness and scared to talk about it. And still, no police officer has lost their job about it. No social worker has lost their job over it. No council employee has lost their job over it. Many, many girls have had their lives ripped apart as a result of what's happened here.
There's a comment here saying, if you don't address the problems, how can you solve them? How can this be solved? What is actually needed to genuinely address this? I mean, I imagine the report says some things, but what might we add on to that?
Well, the report sort of says things like, let's come up with action plans. Let's come and collaborate with different people. Let's make sure every school's got a safeguarding officer and this kind of thing. I don't really think all of that's going to make very much difference. I think it sort of helps at the margins, but doesn't really make very much difference. I think we need to talk about it, teach people about it, say, look, this is going on, explain the rationale behind it, explain the worldview behind it. There are moderate Muslims out there who would actually like Muslims to know that this is what's happening and explain some of what's happening here. One of the stories in the report is a counsellor, the chief executive of the council. They produced a video, about your boyfriend may not be what he seems, something like that. The counsellor was so offended by the content that he blocked it and stopped it from being shown to the girls in schools. It's that kind of thing that needs to actually happen, though. You need to produce videos saying, look, this is happening. These Muslim men are picking on white or non-Muslim girls and doing this. And let's warn the children. Let's talk about it to the children. Let's make sure that every school knows that this is going on and is prepared to talk about it, so the children feel as well that they're able to talk about it. Of course, they're massively intimidated. I mean, one of the stories is a girl who was actually, her house was set on fire, and her mother and herself and her sister and her unborn child all died because her perpetrator did that. And then that, of course, became well known throughout Telford, and all the girls are told, if you tell anyone about this, that's what will happen to you. So, you know, you need to deal with this and be prepared to make sure the girls know there are people they can trust who will actually protect them, will actually deal with it. Of course, what they've experienced over 40 years is the police don't take action. The police aren't interested. The police turn a blind eye and all that. So there's a massive turnaround to happen. And the police have got to be incentivized, taught, you know, make sure you've got to show no fear or favor. You've got to not be afraid of Islamophobia. You've got to not be afraid of being accused of racism. You've got to tackle these things. Underage sex is a crime. I don't care what the background of the girls is. It's a crime. You need to deal with it. You need to tackle it. You need to arrest the people who are carrying it out and not just ignore it and not say, oh, I might be accused of racism or Islamophobia. You've got to deal with it. It needs a whole culture change in the police, the social services, the schools, the councils. A whole culture change has got to happen in order to make this stop.
And also, what can the church do? That's the other side of it. Where is the church there? Where are the churches where the girls can go to for help? Like the Middle Ages, the church or the monastery that people go run to for protection, or even in the Bible where it has those protective cities. You know, where is the place that girls and families can go to? Surely the church can do far more than it's doing. And I think it's a real challenge to Christians. If I've got my eye out, even in the area I'm looking at, there's a very strong Islamic presence here. It's small, but it's strong, and it's very traditional. And I'm always just asking the Lord that he would bring anyone who may need help to our doorstep, because then we have contacts to something we can do about it, and we can maybe provide some sort of protection. But as Christians, as the church, we have got to think, we've got to step up and to respond to this need, so that, yes, there needs to be changes in policy, which Christian Concern also is really helping with. But what do we, the church, do? We have to think about being far more proactive and far more brave, and being a citadel, being a protection and a help. And ultimately, we also need people who are courageous, like Hatun, who we were talking at the beginning, to take the gospel to such Muslims, because it's that kind of Muslim that we are not engaging with. The people who are hardened by Islam and are doing this against non-Muslims, we have to be brave enough to engage with them and see them come to Christ, because they could become incredible Christians. That's ultimately where transformation is going to happen, is a transformation of heart and mind as they surrender to the Lord Jesus.
Absolutely right.
And a Christian Concern, you know, we're doing things on the policy level, but we'd obviously love to support any church in any way we can that is trying to kind of develop this kind of ministry. I think it's really important to say, no one feels equipped before they start doing these sorts of things, right? No one feels like they're going to be the experts in these sorts of situations, and yet we need to step up and become the experts. And, you know, we'd be very happy to help anyone in that kind of way.
Some people might say, well, I know nothing about Islam. You don't need to know anything about Islam. You just need to know Christ. And then his character of love and kindness and goodness will be what, you know, helps these young girls and so on, and hopefully can transform the perversion of the minds and the actions of those men. So basically, if you know Christ, then he can equip you if the Lord is prompting an action.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's move on to our final kind of main issue then. So Lady of Heaven was a film that came out, and again we had a situation where we had a film that was being shown at certain cinemas that was upsetting to some Muslims. I think, Beth, you know a fair bit about this. So what were the protests about?
Well, it's quite interesting to read the different responses and the different attitudes of Muslims. This happens actually every time there is something prominent about Islam. For example, many years ago, there was some Muslim women leading prayers. They tried to lead the prayers in mosques. They weren't allowed, so they went to the cathedrals. So for whatever reason, the cathedrals in New York, and I think there's a place over here, allowed them to do that. But nevertheless, they had to go to the church for the women to lead prayers. And there was outcry from around the Islamic world world, especially some of the highest clerics and Islamic law teachers and so on. Well, the same thing happened with this film, where you have likely to be, I think there was Shia people who were developing the film, and of course they are a minority in Islam. We don't exactly know the percentage. Some people say maybe 15% are Shia Muslim. We're not exactly sure. But anyway, regardless, they're a small minority, but then the majority who are Sunni took exception to this. And of course, Fatima, who is the Lady of Heaven, Fatima is highly revered in Shia Islam, not so much in Sunni Islam, which is the mainstream or majority of Muslims, but Fatima is revered in Shia. And I can understand why my Shia Muslim friends, mainly from Iran and maybe a bit from Syria and places like that, they would want to develop a movie about Fatima. And what's interesting is that they didn't show her face. So that because of course it's wrong to show your face of the prophets or the holy people in Islam. They even tried to be careful that way, but there was such an exception to this this portrayal of this Muslim person, and of course the story would be slightly different in Shia and Sunni traditions. So the Sunnis and many Muslims were upset about that. So again, it highlights the tensions with Islam that's been there from the very, very beginning, almost a tension for supremacy between these two sects of Islam. And I don't think there was any way forward. And of course,
Beth, what you're saying is it's really an intra-Muslim, intra-Islamic debate.
That was part of the problem. Yes,
right?
that's part of the issue.
And that was going on. Probably most of the people who are protesting against the film had never even seen it.
Yeah, yes,
it didn't end up getting shown very much in the UK. So
yeah, and of course, again, our cinemas acquiesced and pulled the film, didn't they?
Yeah.
Like I think Signworld or one of those pulled the actual film.
Yeah, so a few protests outside the cinemas, and the cinemas say no, we can't show this, and therefore they're kind of capitulating to a kind of Islamic mob and a kind of Islamic blasphemy kind of law, effectively, or de facto sort of situation in the UK, where if you make a film that some Muslims might object to, you can't show it. I mean, yeah, that's it. You can't show it. And they won't show it. So it kind of shows the influence of Islam now. Nobody will make a film portraying Islamic people or portraying the Islamic history today to show in mainstream cinemas, because they'll know protests will come and it won't happen. So we have a kind of Islamic veto on culture, Islamic veto on certain aspects of our culture in this country today. Of course, ever since Salman Rushdie, we have a kind of Islamic veto on the way that Islam is portrayed in books, in mainstream bookstores, because that has affected the culture a lot in terms of what people are prepared to say about Muhammad and so on. And now here in the film world, you know, nobody's going to invest money in portraying a film about Islamic history that they know Muslims might protest to, because they think it's not worth it. So you kind of have a veto there as well at the moment. So the Islamic culture is basically, you know, gaining such dominance that nobody dares criticize it in the media, in media ways at the moment.
But in many ways, these things, am I right, are based on Islamic sources and official biographies. You know, some of the questions that people have, I mean, we're going to move on to your book in a second, I think, but you know, some of the questions that we have about Muhammad's life or his actions, these things are based on records and biographies that that Muslims themselves are very happy with. Is that right?
So again, there's a divide between Shia and Sunni Muslims. They would agree on some things, but Sunni and Shia Islam Muslims would go to different traditions, and different sects of Islam within those two main branches would also go to different traditions or throw out traditions. Like modernist feminist Muslims are throwing out the traditions almost entirely, or picking the ones that fit their particular vision of Islam. So it is quite a pick and choose religion, and there is tension within Islam itself about which traditions you go to. But you are correct in that the stories of Muhammad and his wives and the daughter and his children, or the few of them, and his men and so on, that comes right out of early biographies. And the two big early biographies that people can find translated in the English language, well, they're just called The Life of Muhammad, the Sirah Rasulullah. One is translated by Alfred Guillaume, and then you have Al-Waqidi, the Maghazi, so the raids of Muhammad. Those are the two very early, or the earliest biographies of Muhammad, and they're the most authoritative according to most Muslims around the world. But there are some deeply troubling stories in there, including ones taking women as captives and sex slaves and so on. And so some modernist Muslims throw those out. So yeah, there's a hot debate within Islam about which traditions to follow and which traditions are reliable and not reliable and so on. But these stories of Muhammad, of his actions and of his daughter, say Fatima and others, it does come from Islamic tradition. So it's not an external story about them. It is based on Islamic tradition accepted by some parts of the Islamic community.
Yeah.
Let's get on to your book then, because we're running out of time. So you've written together this book. Tim, you can show it again.
Yeah.
In fact,
so it's called Questions to Ask Your Muslim Friends, and subtitled A Closer Look at Islamic Texts and Beliefs. And it's a short little book, but it's got lots of packed with interesting questions for you to ask Muslims, to as suggestions really for how to engage Muslims about their faith, starting from very simple ideas like how do you become a Muslim, or what difference does prayer make in your life, that sort of thing. It doesn't really require any specialist knowledge. And then moving on to comparing Muhammad and Jesus, which is always a good way to sort of engage Muslims about their faith. And then moving on from that to more things like details about what the Quran teaches and questionings about what the Quran teaches, the kind of stuff we've been talking about today in some ways. We're bringing it out in the autumn. It's not out yet, but we're just sort of saying, we're really looking forward to getting it out there. And we're hoping to be a really powerful resource to encourage Christians to have those conversations, hold Islam to account, ask some questions of your Muslim friends. Why do they believe this? What do they think about this text in the Quran? That kind of thing. And just start opening up and start sharing your faith. And I think we just
jam-packed full of verses, isn't it, Tim? Quranic verses, Bible verses, jam-packed full of Christian theology in comparison to Islamic theology, Christian history, Islamic history. So it's quite, I thoroughly enjoyed investigating, studying this stuff. I know you did too. So we hope it will be, as you say, a resource that people can dip into and find a help for their conversations.
Yeah.
And from my experience of talking to Muslims, they're very up for talking about their faith generally, aren't they? And for getting into these discussions. And so hopefully this will be a really good guide for the kind of fruitful areas to talk about for Christians when they're wanting to speak to their friends. So that's coming in. Is it coming out in September, thereabouts?
Yep, hope so. Yep.
Yeah.
It's written, so
Let's go. Yeah, we just got to.
It's ready to go. Mostly it's just us making sure we get the word out about it and get it into your hands. So do look out for that, and we'll have more about that in the upcoming weeks, I'm sure. Thanks so much, Beth and Tim, for joining us this lunchtime. I hope everyone listening and watching has found this really useful. We've got a great Savior. We've got a great Lord in Jesus who doesn't have us do these wicked things, for sure, and whose example is great to all of us, and it's just wonderful to have a God we can truly love and model our lives after in this way. And so what a great example Jesus is to us, both sometimes meeting someone in a situation where they just need kindness and compassion, and where they've been hurt in various ways. You see lots of stories of Jesus doing that in the Gospels, but also sometimes confronting things that are thoroughly wicked. And we see both of those examples from Jesus, and I think we should be modeling our lives and our witness after both of those things in Jesus. So thanks very much for joining us. I want to remind everyone that they can join our mailing list, our email list at christianconcern.com/hello. That'd be really great to do, because we've got lots of news coming this evening from Christian Concern. This lunchtime or earlier today, we had the results in Archie Battersby's case, which has been going on in the news lots. So we'll have more on that. There's stuff about the Conservative Party leadership race that Tim's written. There's even an article on pronouns that's floating around and might be out by then. That I've written. So do come and join us on our email list. We'd really love to see you there, so you can find out more about those things. But for now, that's it for today. And I'm sure we'll be back again at 1 p.m. next week for more. So we'll see you then. Thanks for joining us.
Paul. Thank you.